There we go. All right, you guys. First of all, I just want to say thanks to Coach Jackson for inviting me on. I'm really excited to have this opportunity and kind of share my knowledge with you guys and, discuss what COVID did for training. And then also, I want to touch on actually building an off-season program because that'll relate into everything. As Coach Jackson said, we hadn't seen each other since 2013. And I shared this story with him. I want to share it with you guys. He's been noted to have a slogan of "Be on side." Yeah, we actually got shirts made with Regina Thunder. I thought about wearing it tonight, but couldn't find it. So I just wanted to share that. That's something that resonates with me with Coach Jackson. Something very cool. But anyways, building an off-season program. So as we dive into this, all right, a little background on myself. I'm from Weyburn, Saskatchewan. Went to the University of Regina, completed a kinesiology degree in human kinetics. And then I attended the University of Guelph pursuing football. That was my big push to go out there. As you guys see, I played at the Regina Thunder for 5 years and then played 3 years at the University of Guelph. And then within that time, my experience, I did my field work, my kinesiology degree, level 10. And then when I moved back to Regina from Guelph, I got hired on back at level 10 and have been assisting the large group of guys that have been training the Regina Thunder. So part of that strength and conditioning staff, the Regina Thunder. Just so you guys know a little bit more about me, if you don't, I am engaged. I've been engaged for 3 years. Was one of the lucky guys to propose to my fiance on the field after beating Laurier to make it into playoffs. So very exciting time for us. I've been a hockey official for about 15 years now. Something I'm very passionate about. Now with my playing days in the horizon or in the back burner now, I'm looking into officiating. As you can see, my dad and my brother are two mentors in that field for me. And then I love to travel. So big Vikings fan. Finally got to go see my first game this past fall, this past season. Very exciting time, and supporting fiance who understands that even though playing football is over, football is not gone in my life, and absolutely loves it. So what we're going to talk about tonight, we're going to go over a year-long training cycle and phases throughout the weight room and how that kind of correlates to what we're working with right now. Year-long training cycle on field, and again, same thing, how that kind of works through into right now, into COVID. The things of benefits of training besides performance enhancement, things you can do as a coach that will benefit your team outside of actually just becoming more physically fit and prepared in that aspect. And then actually diving into how COVID actually affected training and what we can do to benefit our athletes around that. And then touch a little bit on in-season training, especially as we kind of work through COVID and move into preseason and into season, and actually how you can use this to benefit more than just the next 6 to 8 weeks. All right, so year-long training cycle. What I have on the screen here might seem kind of like a lot of mumbo jumbo to you guys, but what we really want to look at here, all right, is that everything's planned out from the end of the season all the way to training camp. So what you guys are looking at, I just took this from one of my projects I completed at university. It's a collegiate athlete working into his first season in the CFL. But the big things I want to point out is a 2-week rest and recovery phase. And then as you work in through your off season, like I said, everything's planned out, but the big thing is kind of this bottom portion here. And what we discuss is volume, intensity, and then the black line here is peaking. So, how what your athlete's performance is going to be like leading up to the big moment. So for this athlete here, it was prepping him for the CFL Combine and getting him ready for, the biggest interview of his career, and then also being able to turn that around and prep him for training camp so he's ready to play at training camp. Couple definitions I want you guys to kind of get off the bat is intensity, which is how hard one given exercise is to complete, or how hard one workout is to complete. Biggest thing I want to point out there, lots of times, even from my personal experience, when we first dive into the weight room right at the end of the season, coaches want their intensity very high. They want to bring the heat. They want guys to buy into their program. They want guys to understand, this is how our season's going to be next year. But we actually want a low intensity when we first start, solely because we're trying to recover from the season. A lot of these guys, especially high school athletes, they might be transitioning into, other sports or finals or projects or things of that nature. So we don't want to add that extra stress. And then the other thing I want to compare there is volume. So when we look at volume, it's scientifically based on strength and conditioning. It's reps times sets times weight. And the ways you would look at that are per workout, and then per week, and then also per cycle. What I mean by cycle is, for example, anatomical adaptation. So we really want to look at those numbers as well, so we're not overtraining our athlete or putting too much stress onto them early, which will lead to either overtraining or injuries. So diving into that anatomical adaptation. So this is kind of 2 weeks after the season. You've given your guys, time to go do things they want, whether that be video games, whether that be catching up on homework, hanging out with friends outside of football, things of that nature. Big thing what we want to do here is we just want to get them prepped into an off season, get them ready for off season training. Biggest thing I want to point out here is a lot of strength gains made for a lot of athletes, whether they're new to strength and conditioning, new to training, or you've had these guys, 3 to 4 or 5 years working out at gym. The first 6 weeks post season, they will see a lot of quote unquote strength gains. They'll see themselves start moving more weight a little bit faster. That's just because their body, from mind to muscle, starting to connect a little bit more. They're starting to recruit more muscle fibers that they already had there. They just haven't used them recently. And what I find a lot of times, even personal experience, is coaches get excited for that growth and they overdo it. So again, it should be very light, very simple. Again, frequency, intensity, volume, all of that stuff, very low. This is a great time to work on mobility, great time to fix imbalances, and a good time, build a base for the off season. This is a great time to maybe instill habits for your athletes, whether that's proper sleeping habits, whether that's cleaning up the weight room, making sure the locker room's clean, things of that nature. It's a great time to use that to instill those things. A couple other things I want to point out here is the RPE scale. So you'll see this kind of throughout the presentation. What I mean by RPE is rate of perceived exertion. If you Google this and want to dig into this a little bit deeper, there are 2 RPE scales. One's for aerobic training, so running, biking, things of that nature. It's kind of a funky scale. It's not 0 to 10. We want to avoid that one. The one we want to focus on is actually for weight training. It's a very simple scale, 0 to 10. 0 being, 0% effort put into it, 10 being 10 out of 10, 1 rep max, can't do a second rep, things of that nature. And area emphasis for this is very low. The reason why I spent a lot of time on this slide is it comes into play as we kind of exit COVID. So big thing, 50%, and really educating the athlete that 50% might not seem like a lot, but our goal when we start strength training isn't to lift as heavy as we can tomorrow. It's to be as strong and as fast as we can day one at training camp. That when we look at this in November or December, we have a long period before our season rolls around, and we don't need to go 100% 10 out of 10 day one. That's saved for practice number 1, preseason, training camp, not for day one. Once you finish that 4 to 6 week training cycle, we work in a hypertrophy. So goal here is to increase muscle stimulus to promote muscle activation and growth. So all that jargon, what that means is we want that pump. We want to feel that pump. This is the bodybuilding viewpoint. We want to have the muscles be full of blood. We want to break down as much muscle fiber as we can. Biggest thing there you'll notice is reps are very high. So when we discuss that, we're looking at 8 to 15 reps to build muscle. intensity in itself is still low. So like I said, 8 RPE at this time in the off season, they're 80% in their mind, especially with the younger athlete. You really have to coach that. If it's a younger athlete, they're 80%, they might actually push closer to 100% or overdo it. And on the opposite side of the spectrum, you might have athletes who have done this many a times. They might not reach that 80%, so you might have to push. But we really want to focus on the volume in this stage, but keep intensity low so that we don't overtrain and have injuries. Big things we want to focus on in this is hamstring and back movements, especially as we start moving through the phases. One thing I explain to all my athletes is I use what I call the TV theory. So if you have a large, big screen TV, I always ask them, would you put it on a big TV stand or a little nightstand? And they always laugh at me. I'd put it on a big TV stand. And I said, that's your back. TV is your chest. That's your bench press. You don't put a big TV on a small nightstand. You put it on a nice big TV stand to support it. So this is a great phase to really focus on our back muscles, our pulling muscles. And it's the same thing with our hamstrings, something to really emphasize in this phase. As we work through this, our strength phase, okay, this is where we want to increase the amount of load in each exercise while maintaining proper technique. So with that being said, a lot of times when we say strength, we think of either 225 for as many reps as possible as the CFL Combine, right? That's strength endurance. Or we think of how much weight can you bench or how much weight can you squat. Again, our training cycle isn't for this week. We're not training to peak end of week 1 strength phase. We're preparing to peak day 1 of training camp. So even though we are trying to work that strength side of things and we're increasing intensity, we still want to focus on proper technique. That weight should still be able to move through the entire technique. And the biggest thing, if I could emphasize anything in this phase, is make sure the weight is moving throughout the rep, right? These guys aren't power lifters. They're not training to be put on a bench press and push as much weight as possible once. We still want a good quality rep. So if the weight stops at any point in time, that's where we want somebody to step in and rack the weight, tell them to take some weight off, and make sure we work through that entire range of motion with proper technique. Within the off season, this is probably where you'll see a lot of injuries, a lot of muscle strains and tears and things of that nature. And that's just trying to limit volume, and it's trying to limit how much weight guys try to move. You see this all the time. I don't know how many times in the strength phase, even myself included, coach would give me a percentage to work from, and I kind of scoff at it. I can do more than that. So I add 5 or 10 pounds and then I get pinned. Coach is like, no, that percentage is there for a reason. I like using the RPE scale for younger athletes, so high school athletes, because it translates. It's not a specific number that they can focus on. It'll depend on how they feel throughout the workout or throughout the off season. Again, high school athletes, you might have guys playing basketball, doing track and field, and they're doubling up on those types of things. So having that number, that RPE number, allows them to govern themselves as they work through this program. Again, when we look at strength, we're looking at 2 to 6 reps. So my example on the right here, right, it's as low as 4 reps. It's something that we don't really want to work to 2 or 1 rep. I mean, many ways to build strength, but in the end of it all, we really want to focus on making sure our athlete is healthy as we work through that, right? Big thing with that as well is we want to increase our rest periods because we are working strength. So the background science behind that is it's very taxing on the mind. It's very taxing on the nervous system to move a heavy weight. So we want to give our body as much time as possible to rest, to allow ourselves to be able to repeat that weight or even add a little bit more weight for the next set. And the last thing I'd like to point out there is accessory exercises to not be completed at high intensity or in a strength context. Lots of times, even in past examples, even with training staffs at the U Sports level, when we work through our phases, we hit a strength phase, everything had a strength phase mentality to it, whether that was our bench press at the start of the workout to our bicep curls at the end of the session. Again, we want to think of fatigue. We want to think of how our athlete's going to feel at the end of this workout. Bicep curling 5 reps as heavy as they can, is it going to benefit them on the field? If they want to work very accessory work such as that, we want them to still feel good at the end of it. So that's where, you stick more to the hypertrophy, 8 to 10 reps. And that's where we kind of get our volume within our workouts. Again, you can split your workouts however you want. If you guys have questions on that, please ask them. But I'm being very general, so you guys can kind of use your little bit of knowledge on strength training, things like that, to build your own kind of program in the back of your head right now. So again, accessory exercises not to be completed at high intensity or in a strength context. As we move on to our power phase, all right, this is the fun one. This is the one everybody likes doing. This is the one you see all over social media, right? Goal of this is to move as dynamically or as fast as possible, right? If we want to go very scientific, the formula for power is force times velocity. And again, we can break down force, mass times acceleration, velocity is speed times distance, right? We can really break that down and fully understand what the goal is. Essentially, it's to move as fast as possible. The biggest thing with that, when we focus on that, is translating those strength gains to create as much force as possible. So if you take your athletes and you put them through a strength cycle and you have all of your athletes increase their strength, but they don't move any faster, now we haven't actually built their power. We actually haven't used that strength gain to benefit them for on-season training. We haven't used it to benefit their performance on the field. If we go back here, if we dive back, if you guys look at the exercises as we work through this, I've also shown different ways in which you can use a simple exercise and kind of progress it through these phases. So dumbbell bench press instead of barbell, kettlebell goblet squat instead of using a bar, kettlebell straight leg deadlift, and then a dumbbell single arm row. So very simple movements. Again, rep schemes are kind of similar to what you'd see in those phases. Working into hypertrophy, still using the dumbbell bench press, but now we're looking at a split squat. So now instead of a double leg movement, we're focusing on a single leg movement. Now we're adding a barbell to our glute bridge, and a glute bridge instead of a RDL, instead of a hinging movement, and then a barbell row, adding a little bit more stability to those exercises. And then again, very stable movements when we get into our strength phase: bench press, barbell squat, whether it's back or front squat, barbell RDL, and then our single arm row with the dumbbell to allow for maximum strength movements. And then our power, again, this is the fun one: medicine ball chest press toss. Now we've foregone the barbell movement. We want to move something as fast as we can. So let's throw it. Let's actually get it off of our hands. Football specific in those terms, hex bar squat jump. So now we're actually putting some weight on and jumping while we complete that squat movement. Hang clean, it's the same idea. I think you guys are kind of picking up what I'm saying here. This is where we want to take that strength gain and actually put it into context, and not football specific, but still weight room specific in terms of strength training, but using exercises that really focus on moving as dynamically as fast as possible. A couple of things I want to point out is power exercises are very taxing on the body. So we want to reduce the volume when we get here, right? If you guys remember what it felt like to jump while holding weight, or if you've ever done, hang cleans in the weight room, like you do 3 or 4 of those, you're gassed. It's hard to breathe. Your body's really struggling to get through that. So we want to reduce the volume, and at the same time, our RPE should come down. So 70% out of 100%. But our emphasis is on the actual movement itself as we work through that. So one thing I've really picked up on, I'm really going to start using once we get back into the weight room, is there's no intensity without intent. So if you have no intent through your movement, if you have no intent through whatever you're doing, you can't bring intensity, because it doesn't matter. There's no cause and effect to that. So even though we drop the RPE, we kind of, pull back on the reins on our athletes, we increase the intent. Why are we doing this? We're not just throwing the ball for the sake of throwing the ball. We're throwing the ball as fast as possible to increase that power within our chest, so that when we go and block somebody on the other side of the ball, or we go to shiver somebody to work through to make the tackle, we're doing it as fast as possible and using as much strength as possible. And these exercises aren't done just for the sake of doing it. As we go through that, so that's our weight room kind of side of things. Again, this will all tie together as we work towards the end of this presentation. Second thing I want to touch on is on-field progression. Sometimes this gets lost, especially with coaching staffs and how do I want to explain it? Especially with coaching staffs and taking the players to the field. Whenever we take a player to the field, lots of times we instantly want to get into position specific or football related drills. It's challenging. Even as a strength coach myself, you want to relate everything to the sport so that the players can buy in and they understand why they're doing it. But it doesn't mean that every single drill has to be position specific or sport specific. So what we're touching on the left side here, we want to work through that same progression as the weight room. We want movement quality, and we want to fix movement patterns, and then add velocity or movement to these patterns as we work through our off season. It doesn't hurt any athlete to focus on how to shuffle, because that'll teach them how to transition from a sideways movement to a sprint, or turning their hips to run a certain direction. And then as you kind of build through that, then you start adding more things to that. You create small space drills that emphasize these movements, whether that be capture the flag, tag, any type of drill like that. And then you start working to position specific game like drills, whether that be skelly, O-line working through blocking schemes, things of that nature. And it's the exact same thing as the off-field progression, right? We want to have a linear plan. We want to have a plan from day one of the off season to day one at training camp. And we want that to slowly build as we work through that program, right? Big thing is we always want to visit the fundamentals through the entire program. So as we start progressing, we start, instead of just focusing on, okay, a lateral movement, we're now working from lateral to a forward movement. Let's remind the athletes, when you do that lateral movement, we want to have these specific movement patterns still there. We don't want to forget everything we just worked on just because we added another layer to it. And then the last thing there is, a big thing that I think everybody struggles with, myself included, is we only want to progress once the goal of your program has been reached. So we only want to progress once we get the basics down. If you take an athlete and he's not coordinated, and you're trying to teach him running mechanics, he's not understanding, there's not going to be a high benefit to get him to run as fast as he can, because he's going to have a barrier. He's going to have a ceiling that he's going to reach. If you work on the mechanics, if you work on the basics, and you get him moving properly, whether it be tight hips or things of that nature, he will naturally become faster, just because of you've made him faster by focusing on the mechanics of basics. It's the same thing when you look at, say, a D lineman working on his block shedding skills, working through the line of scrimmage. You're not going to show him once, practice it for a practice or two practices, and then forego it and focus on something else. That's something you constantly return back to. It's something you constantly work on, and you don't focus on the speed side of things. You focus on the technique side of things, and he will become faster because he becomes more efficient in that movement. So to kind of work through that again, on the left side of the screen, you will see everything we just discussed in the weight room. On the right side, everything we're looking at on the field. So anatomical adaptation, we are starting to get back in the weight room when we're discussing this, but allow them to do things they haven't done all season, or let them focus on another sport. Especially a high school athlete, they're probably playing basketball, they're probably playing hockey or another sport. Let them do that, right? Let's not drag them into the weight room and instantly get their mind set on football. As we all know, playing more than one sport is going to benefit them on the football field. So let them focus on basketball. Let that be their conditioning. Let that sport be their on-field training in football, right? At the same time, allow them to take their mind off football training and let them just train as an athlete. As an example, Regina Thunder did a great job having a basketball tournament every winter. At least when I was there, I believe it's still going on. Scotty might be able to bring that back up. But watch an old lineman shoot a 3-point and watch his smile go from ear to ear, because he's so used to being the big guy in the paint, doing the dirty work. Let him just be an athlete. Let him go stand out in the 3-point line. Let him go be the receiver in touch football. Let them take their mind off of being, I'm an old lineman, I'm a football training athlete, and just let them be athletes. It's a great time to do that. It's a great time to build team unity with that as well. And a big thing is when you come into that anatomical adaptation phase, workouts we want to be shorter in duration. We want to allow them to be human beings outside of athletes, right? Again, this is a time where they're catching up on homework, things of that nature. We dive into hypertrophy. Now we're starting to focus more on football specific, I quote that, football specific things. So we want to build a base. So when I say that, I don't mean go out and start running 3 kilometers. What I mean is the workouts themselves in the weight room, we want high volume. So we're adding a lot of stress to the body already. So let's not add more stress to the body by having them go run high volume on field workouts, such as, a lot of sprints or a distance run or things of that nature. This is a great time to focus on technique and movement patterns. This is a great time to have them do A drills against the wall, for example. This is a great time to get them to do 2 crossovers and stop and see where their feet are placed, and allowing every single athlete to do it, right? Will doing sprinting technique benefit a receiver more than an O-lineman? Yes. But will the coordination of trying to learn how to run benefit every athlete on the field? Yes. So we want to focus on the team as a whole as we work through that. And then that's as again, low volume is related to contact compression, right? When we're looking at running, again, we don't want a distance run. We don't want them sprinting, 100 times. If we do want to do any type of speed, agility, quickness training, it's, 15 to 20 minutes. And then we're starting to build a progression and daily areas of emphasis. So now we're starting to build, hey, every single day, we're going to do our running technique. Every single day, we're going to do this as our warm up. And then it slowly just builds off of that. As we go into strength, right, we're starting to take away the volume from our workouts so we can add more volume to our runs. We can start, maybe now we start sprinting a little bit. Maybe we start adding tempo runs or some form of endurance training. We have generic, again, we're still focusing on generic drills where O-linemen do the same drill as the receiver. It'll benefit them in the long run. You're now creating athletes. It's important that now we start planning what we do on field with our off field stuff. So sprints are change of direction. They're very high tempo, or sorry, not high tempo. They're very high in intensity for neurological training. So sprints are as fast as you can. All right, you're priming the body, you're getting it prepped and ready to do a max lift, creating as much force as possible, or a lower body day because it's not as much volume in the terms of actual running or steps or things of that nature. Whereas when we do our endurance training day, that's our submaximal upper body lift days. Okay. When we go into power, now we're working closer to the season. So now we're starting adding position specific movements. Now we're starting getting our O-linemen to work from a stance, our receivers to run more route based, et cetera, and highest volume on field before preseason practice. So what I mean by that is now we're starting to add more than just 10 sprints to our session. So it might be 8 sprints and then going off and doing position specific drills. We're now starting to add, I would call it captain's practices. High school football, that might be something as simple as a coach meeting his receivers and quarterback and running routes, doing things like that. Or if you have the numbers or things like that, you're starting to schedule more skelly practices. And I think of the Thunder, things like that, they do this once a week, right? We still want to focus on total volume throughout the day. So now because we're getting closer to season, this isn't the time to have an hour on field and then an hour in the weight room, right? If our workouts have been an hour and a half throughout the entire off season, we want to maintain that time frame for the entire off season leading up to the preseason practices, right? And again, we're still focusing on what we do per day. So sprinting, change of direction days, on lower body focus days, endurance, upper body focus days. Again, this all depends on how many times you see your athletes. If you have the capabilities to have them train 6 days a week, you can change, you can do solely just a sprinting day, solely just a weight training day. That's totally fine. I'm thinking, especially from past experiences, you might only have your athletes 2 to 3 times a week. So this is something that we kind of want to keep in the back of our mind as we start giving them workouts, getting them to do things of that nature. I got this from a friend of mine sent me this. He got it from strength and conditioning coach, Indiana University. It's just a basic program progression from acceleration to max speed. Again, when we look at this, acceleration is going to emphasize more the O line, D line, even our combo positions, running back, linebackers, and then our max speed is going to benefit our back end of things, our receivers, our DBs, our special teamers, if we have guys in that kind of that scenario, right? And then again, just kind of going through each phase and what you'd want to focus on. So hypertrophy, we want to focus on 10-yard emphasis with very light resistance. With strength, we want to add 10 extra yards, but we want to add resistance. So again, even though we're focusing on acceleration, that doesn't always mean we're trying to run as fast as we can. We add the heavy resistance. We're focusing on creating as much force as possible. And then once we get into our power, or that transition to our power, now we're adding our 20 to 30 yard starts. And then we're starting to add our, 30 to 40 yard, or even a hill sprint up 10 yards. And then again, max speed, same idea. Hypertrophy, we're focusing on form. We're focusing on developing things we might have not touched on before, working on our ankles, things of that nature. When we focus on our strength, we're now building up, 40 to 60 yard buildups, finishing with a sprint, or what they call float sprint. So you would run, 20 to 30 yards, sub max, so 75 to 80%. And the last 10 yards, you kind of give a little burst. And then finishing with what they call flying sprints, 20 yards plus a 10 yard at all out. So accelerating 20 yards at all out. Or some people like downhill sprints, or which is called overspeed training. I'm not a huge fan of this because I'm not a huge fan of downhill sprints, solely because technique is very important with that. And the biggest thing I could touch on with all of this is if any athlete starts losing technique, whether that's weight training, whether that's on-field progression, that's where we want to cut them off. That's where we want to stop them and kind of pull them back a bit, because that's when injuries start happening, right? Regardless of what the exercise is and what the focus is, the second they start losing form, that's where injuries start occurring, whether it's fatigue, whether it's lack of mobility. We don't want to push them through that movement. We want to work on that limitation, so that when we do keep working through our entire off-season program, they're benefiting through the whole thing. As you guys probably have been through, the last thing you want is not only be injured in season, but also be injured in the off-season, right? When you can't work out for 2 to 3 weeks or to a month, right? That's a lot of volume. That's a lot of training sessions that you miss out on. So we really want to make sure that our athletes stay healthy throughout the entire off-season. Couple of things to remember as we kind of start working into this, right? Endurance for football is not marathon training. We might run a lot on the field, but we don't continuously run the entire time, right? It's a combination of multiple sprints with large rest periods. So we want to work to a 1-to-4, 1-to-5 rest ratio. That's what's going to happen on field. When we train them, we can work down to a 1-to-3 or 1-to-2 work to rest ratio. So for example, 20 seconds of running would be equivalent to 40 seconds of rest, or a minute of rest. We want to work through that because that's football specific, especially when we're training football athletes. Again, endurance training early in the off season. So endurance training through our hypertrophy phase, our anatomical adaptation phase, will build a great base, which will lead us into this style of programming, and it'll benefit us in the weight room with rest periods. But that's not what football is. So we kind of, lots of times we get focused on, I want my athletes running 3 or 4 kilometers, 3 times a week. It makes them an athlete, but it doesn't make them a football athlete, if that makes sense to you guys in that sense. So again, whether that's sprint training, endurance training, change of direction, plyometric training, we want to remember that work to rest ratio as we work through that. And then again, one other point I'd like to point out, max sprint training is not endurance training. So if we want to work an athlete to run as fast as they possibly can or do something as fast as they possibly can, it shouldn't be endurance focused. It should be focused on moving as fast as we can. So we want to allow them to rest so they can mimic that intensity through the entire workout. And then again, why we strength train. So lots of times, especially right now with COVID, we strength train because we train in general because we want our athletes to be moving right now, right? Normally they'd have school and other things going on. You might have them working out in your weight room, and they can't do that right now. So we're just trying to get them to move. But remember why we strength train, right? We strength train to reduce the risk of energy, reduce the risk of injury on field and in the off season. We want to increase on-field performance and other things outside of just athletic development. We want to create team unity, and we want to find leaders within our team. Which guys are in the weight room early? Which guys are doing extra mobility? Which guys are doing the extra cardio or the extra running that you're adding because you don't have time for that? Which guys are pushing their teammates? Which guys are dragging friends along into the weight room? You find out a lot about your team and about your athletes solely from strength and conditioning, right? We can find out which athletes are motivated. We can find out which athletes are only there for themselves compared to the team. You might find a guy who works out really hard but doesn't talk to any of his teammates, kind of pushes them off. He's only there to get that college scholarship. He's only there to benefit himself. Which guys are there doing those things, but then also, lifting the guys around them, trying to push the guys around them, trying to teach the guys around them, right? Which athletes are looking for a relationship with you as a coach or from a teammate that they might not have, say, at home. You might have athletes that don't have a great family relationship or an at-home relationship, and you might be the guy they want to lean on, right? This is a great time to do it outside of football. This is a great time to do it where there's less tension. If I talk to coach about this, am I going to lose playing time? If I talk to coach about this, is he gonna put me in places just because he knows? Whereas when you're in the weight room in this context, it takes away all those stressors from an athlete and it allows you to create that connection. So with that being said, let's avoid the workouts, to build a man. Let's not try to knock our athletes down. There's time and a place for things like that, but the weight room and weight training isn't that place, right? This is all about athlete development. That's not a place to do it. That's where we see injuries. That's where we see guys lose motivation, right? Again, max days every day. We're training for the entire offseason. We want to be our best day one of training camp. We don't want to be our best at the end of the week. We want to slowly get better throughout that entire offseason. Pukers, again, same thing, kind of the same ideas. Workouts build the man. Distance runs just because. Football athletes, that doesn't benefit them. And using workouts as a punishment, right? Workouts are there to benefit. They're not there to bring the athlete down. They're there to build the athlete up. There's a time and a place to use sprints or use 110s as discipline, but we don't want that to be the only reason why athletes do their exercise. We don't want that to be the only reason why athletes have to do push-ups or runs or things of that nature, right? We want to avoid that negative connotation of workouts and punishment. We want to have workouts be seen as a benefit to the athlete. Okay. Rolling over into this pandemic that we're all dealing with right now and how all of this ties together, right? As we all know, athletes are stuck at home. A lot of them are limited or don't have any equipment at home. A lot of them, it's hard to stay motivated, right? What do you mean I don't have school? I don't have to wake up early. I can sleep in. I can play video games with the boys all night. I don't, maybe my diet's starting to go, right? Those are all things that we have to deal with. They're losing that connection to teammates. You can't meet as a team. You can't work out beside the guy. And then there's a lack of certainty which going on. We don't know if we're going to have a season this fall. We don't know when things are going to start be going back to normal. We see our progression, but we don't know. So there's an increase in stress there on top of all that, which we want to be mindful of. And it also decreases motivation, right? And the biggest thing that we can get out of this and all of us feel it, athletes will miss the game. Our athletes will miss playing football. They'll miss that connection with teammates, that connection to the sport, the things outside of actually playing the game. And we want to be there to support them through that, right? So biggest things there is we want to stick to the program. We want to stick to everything that we've planned and we've built through this off season, right? That's why we build an off season program. When COVID hits us and we're sitting on the back burner, how are we going to get our athletes to buy in a little bit more? We do the exact same fundamental things of what we just talked about. So we do the exact same squat movements. We do the exact same change of direction movements. We just have to be creative on how we do that, right? We want to stick closer to basic movements. Now is not the time to focus on a hang clean. Now is not the time to get that athlete to jump over 3 boxes, right? Because they don't have those things. Let's get them doing a broad jump in their basement. Let's get them jumping up the flight of stairs. Let's get them, instead of doing a hang clean, maybe they're doing a squat jump with a backpack on their back. Maybe they're doing skater jump side to side or lunge jumps. As it gets warmer out, we can work out outside. Maybe now you have them doing continuous broad jumps out in their backyard or out in the park, instead of, again, having them do a hang clean, things like that. You can be very creative on how you add load to an athlete. So you can have milk jugs, backpacks. You can have them, carry a suitcase. I've seen things. I actually forgot I had this photo until right now. I took a photo of one of the Thunder athletes. He was completing movements with a tree trunk because he was out at the lake and with his family, and he didn't have a backpack, so he used a tree trunk as his load for his workout. His movement was still good. It didn't have any repercussion on the quality of his workout, and he was able to complete it by using a piece of wood. I wish I had that photo. I still remember it, right? And same thing, use technology, social media to keep the team engaged. One thing I'm doing with the Thunder right now is at the end of every workout, I ask them a question. I get them to answer the question back on social media. Another reason why I do that is to get more guys to buy in. I want more guys to be curious. Why are they posting this? Why do they keep commenting on these posts? I should show up to the workout to find out why they're doing that, right? And then again, we utilize Zoom. We use Zoom for our workouts together so we can still train as a team. You should see the banter that some of these guys have, mid-workout or at the end of the workout, because they don't get to do that. So now they get to smack talk each other. Guys are bugging each other. Hey, why isn't your camera on? You too scared to show yourself during this workout, right? Oh, you haven't made your gains, et cetera, right? You're creating that team unity as you work through that. So again, we want to work through the same progressions as before, right? We want to find ways to fit our program plan. Something that is awesome, especially if you've been a coach at your program for years. Once you build one off-season program, it's a lot easier to look back and kind of fix things. Maybe you've learned some new stuff and you add it. It's a lot easier to do that. And then instead of walking into the gym every single day and try to make something new every single day, right? Once you build that program, the next season, even the next team you work with, and you have to supply this, you have something to fall back on, right? So we want to find ways to fit our program. We want to be creative in our workouts, right? I have coworkers. We have staff meetings once a week to share these things. We have athletes jumping onto their couch for a box jump. We have athletes running up flights of stairs instead of hills. We have athletes using shoes as hurdles. We have athletes using shoes as cones. We have athletes using salt bags as weight. We have athletes, again, backpacks, suitcases, soup cans, milk jugs, any type of way. We have even milk jugs filled with water or filled with sand to add more density to it, right? And again, find ways to bring our athletes together. Find ways for them to remember what it's like to be on a team, right? And that's a big reason why a lot of us even played our sport. That's a big reason why I loved playing football, right? That was something that I always wanted to do, right? It was be with the boys, go hang out in a hot summer day in August in Saskatchewan, drip and sweat, but it was so much fun because I got to do it with 5 of my best friends, right? So again, looking on the right side of the screen, if we want to attack these things, hypertrophy, we want to look at volume. So right now with the Thunder, I'm into week 1, of their hypertrophy program. So I'm focusing on volume, reps times sets times weight. How can I use that formula and get as much volume in their week, in their workouts as possible? Again, using different techniques, getting them to hold a push-up position, getting them to push against the wall, getting them to go down that push-up as slow as they can and then push up, right? Any way to kind of increase the amount of blood flow, the amount of muscle fiber breakage to rebuild in that state. So then once we go into that next phase in a couple of weeks, we're going to focus on strength. Any way to increase load, again, backpacks, putting them in positions where they're not as strong, single leg squats, things of that idea. Power, moving that load quickly, right? Coach Jackson joined us the one day. We did backpack swings instead of a kettlebell swing, right? We can mimic that movement. We just change what load we're using, right? So again, backpack, suitcases for weight, stairs, couches, chairs for benches, and then find fun and exciting ways to work out that are safe and effective. Again, we still want to focus on the basics, but we can have fun. We can make it enjoyable for the athlete to want to do it again, right? And social media contests, video creation, team competitions. I've seen a lot of teams, they pass, hockey teams passing the hockey puck from stick to stick, soccer teams volleying the ball from teammate to teammate, right? Anything to kind of keep that team together, remember why they do these things and why they play on these teams, right? So again, just a couple examples, right? On the left side, dumbbell bench press. So these guys have dumbbells. We're in our hypertrophy phase based on what we're looking at, right? That's what we would normally work through. Okay, they don't have any equipment. An example would be a 15-second hold in a push-up plus 15 reps. Maybe you do as many reps as you can in a wide push-up, a regular push-up, and a narrow push-up. Maybe you do 15 reps where you go 5 seconds down, 5-second hold, 5-second up, right? Again, rear foot elevated split squat or Bulgarian split squat, right? Same idea. Maybe you do 30-second hold the bottom, 30-second halfway. Maybe you do a 20-second hold, and then you do 10 reps with the tempo and then 5 reps without a tempo. Maybe you do back elevated glute bridge, right? We can add weight with the backpack or things of that nature. We can, again, add tempo, focus on tempo, or we can just do total volume of 100 reps and let them work through that in their capabilities, right? Again, barbell row compared to a backpack row, right? Again, they can add load to that. They can have a massive backpack and put as much weight as possible in there, right? Or if they can't do that, again, 10-second hold plus 20 reps as fast as possible, or you just get them to do as many as they can, and then they take an object out, and then they do it over again, right? Many ways that we can create something at home, something that follows our program, something that follows our plan in which we've created already, or we're now working on, that mimics what we would normally do in the weight room is now done at home. And the best thing about this now is if we have that background understanding of how to build a program, right? I'm thinking of rural teams. I'm thinking of small community teams. You might have that kid that lives on the farm. So over the summer, he's out working on the farm the whole time. Hey, instead of getting you to drive in 4 days a week and take time away from that to do what we think is traditional training, here's an option where you don't need any of the fancy equipment. You can do it just body weight or just adding a backpack. Ways that we can, I just added this today actually. So ways that we can send out our workouts to our athletes. Here are 2 options. I've never worked with Coach Me Plus personally, but it's very similar to Team Builder. So what we use at level 10 for all of our online athletes is Team Builder. It is a fantastic application. I believe there is, you do have to pay a little bit to kind of get all the features. And of course, the more you pay, the more features you get, but very simple. You as a coach, just add in the workout. Something that's very cool with it is when you add the workout, if it's a basic workout such as a bench press, it actually has a YouTube video attached to it. So you can add the bench press. The athlete doesn't know what they're doing. They can watch the video and see how to complete that exercise right on the app. So this is done. You would implement everything on the computer, but they can have it sent right to their phone. Cool things about this is athletes can get an email and a text message every morning they have a workout. You can communicate to your athletes as a team through Team Builder. So you can send a message to your entire team through Team Builder. You can upload your own video every morning. So especially right now, if you're starting to build program day to day, you can film right from Team Builder, right from your app, and upload it to that workout, and the athletes can see what you're expecting as you do that. And on top of all that, when you actually get back into the weight room, it actually has weight room whiteboards right on the app, so you can make it so that it projects onto a screen the workout you want your athletes to complete. And you can also build it so that you have a general workout for all of your athletes, and then you can actually layer underneath that, whether that's O-line, D-line, like combo skill, line combo skill, things of that nature, all within this app. So I absolutely love it, especially now with COVID, diving into it a little bit more. I think it's absolutely fantastic. That's a good one. Now, I just want to touch on this a little bit once we go into return to play. So once COVID starts lifting, we can start practicing things of that nature. We don't want, and I repeat, we don't want to call in our athletes and get them to run 10-1-10s. We don't want to bag them day one. Realistically, we do want to think that way. Maybe 50% of your athletes are actually doing some form of training at home as we speak. And even that, I almost feel optimistic saying that. And that's something that we have to understand as coaches. That's something we have to understand when we start going back into this. Yes, they are athletes, but they are also human and scientifically based. We do need to have a small anatomical adaptation phase before we dive into actual training. So something I want you guys to look at the bottom, okay, right here, is the conditioning training. All right. So the blue is COVID-19 with the star, all student athletes returning from inactivity, and then normal circumstances returning student athletes. So this is that return to play protocol or anatomical adaptation. As you can see, the first 2 weeks are relatively the same, but if all things were normal, we would be back to 100% week 3. With COVID going on, because we kind of stopped mid off season, we do want to limit that a little bit more to 80 to 90 and then up to 100%. Again, if you know for sure your entire team is working out for your entire off season as of right now, this isn't as important because you've already worked through that anatomical adaptation. You've already got them prepped for training camp. You can just go right into return to play. All right. Again, on this side here, as we talked about intensity, or I guess this is returning to volume, sets and reps, right? 11 to 30 units. So what that means is at most you're doing 30 reps of an exercise twice per week. All right. And again, that rest interval is very long. So if it takes you 10 seconds to complete an exercise, you need at least 40 seconds of rest, right? Generally, an exercise takes about 30 to 50 seconds. So we're looking at 2.5 minutes of rest before we return back to either that entire cycle, whatever you guys, how you plan your workouts, how you do those types of things, right? So that's huge. And then again, if you guys want to look through all this stuff, there's a lot more to this, right? As I stated, avoid high volume submaximal exercises to fatigue or perform within a limited time frame. Make sure you have an extended warm-up or dynamic warm-up so you can reestablish sports-related movements. And again, you guys can dive into all this. I have the reference at the bottom of the page here. Big things, again, you guys can look through how you want to schedule things. So now is not the time to get all 60 of your athletes into the weight room day one once COVID lifts, right? Of course, we're going to have limitations to all those things, but something to kind of remember in the back of your head. If you're scheduling 2 or 3 sessions in your weight rooms, you might want 15, 20 minutes in between your sessions so that you can properly sanitize and make sure you respect all protocols as you go through that. And again, how you should clean everything and educate your athletes, things like that. When you look at this, all right, this is, again, NSCA's National Strength and Conditioning Association. It's American-based. So this is American with an American viewpoint. So it's looking at strength and conditioning coaches at the collegiate level. It's looking at strength and conditioning coaches at the high school level, all right, where they have one coach kind of facilitating their gym facility and everything of that nature. So it is a little bit more in depth than maybe what you will have to deal with, but still very good kind of piece of information. Again, another thing that they kind of touched on was, again, maximum conditioning volume per week as we work through, right? So what we're going to look at is new student athletes and new head strength coach, right? Again, 50% working up to week 5. So 5 weeks back to 100%. So again, that's over a month before we're actually back to 100%. Again, on the left side, if you have a lot of your athletes completing workouts at home, you can quickly climb back up to that 100%. Again, everything, I have that link at the bottom. If you guys want to screenshot or look at that a little bit more, go ahead. Third one, I just added this today. We got to be very mindful of this, right? As you guys see in this graph, I got this actually from Instagram, Derek Hansen. We want to start general training. We want to start very basic training. We want to get all the guys doing body weight squats, things of that nature. Again, we want to assume that they haven't done much. And then again, weeks 1, 2, 3, this is a 6-week program where we had started training camp week 3, week 4, where we're slowly starting to add specific training, actual sport movements, focusing on that sport. And then by the time the start of the regular season rolls around, we're actually into what we normally would be working on. All right. So again, start slow, allow the athletes to adapt. Again, we want to assume maybe 50% of the athletes are actually doing stuff, okay? We need at least 3 weeks prior to training camp or season, not because we don't know what's fully going on yet, to prep these athletes, right? The whole point of this is to reduce the risk of injury, right? We want to avoid coming into training camp and overloading our training staff, having them deal with a bunch of injuries. This is all there so that we reduce the amount of injuries coming into camp. Remember something called delayed onset muscle soreness, or you'll see it more commonly known as DOMS, right? 24 to 48 hours post session. So if you were starting to schedule practices or workouts or things of that nature, where we are actually moving barbells and weights like that, that is very important for recovery. We don't want to hit these guys 5 days in a row because they will be very sore day 3, day 4, day 5, working through that week, right? We want to have a long rest period in between sessions so that they can recover, so that we can reduce that risk of injury. And like I keep stating, 50% of our athletes probably have not done much in quarantine, right? They've video games, Call of Duty came out, right? All those types of fun stuff. So we got to remember, right, that's probably what's going on. Again, we also want to touch on kind of the team aspects, right? Guys haven't seen each other in months. Like I said on the Zoom workouts, they're already bantering to each other. Imagine what that's going to be like when they can actually see each other in person. All right. I've always said there's a reason why schools are closed. If you ever tried to tell a kid not to touch his face or keep his hands to himself, that's what we're going to be dealing with when we get back into team training, right? Means that things are going back to normal. So guys are starting to get excited. They're starting to realize that, hey, being stuck at home isn't going to be the norm anymore. So they're going to be excited. Increased testosterone, adrenaline. They will naturally increase the intensity in the workouts, in our practices. You guys know how it is when you're stuck, especially in Saskatchewan, when you're stuck and you can't go catch a football for 3 months and you tell a receiver to go run a light fade route, he's going to go 90%. That's just the nature of it. He's excited to go catch that football. It's going to be hard to filter that. So we got to remember that, right? And then again, we want to treat all athletes as if they haven't done much at all throughout this off season. Okay. I wanted to touch on this very quickly, although in-season training, because something that maybe a lot of coaches don't have a grasp on, or they want to add. We want to maintain everything the athlete earned in the off season, right? Lots of times I remember go through the off season, bench as much as I can, sprint as fast as I can. We go to start of the off season after that year, and I can't bench nearly as much. I can't run nearly as fast, right? We want to maintain everything they lost in the off season, right? Big thing, benefits that no loss strength in season. No, we can focus on basic movement, so we can focus on movement patterns, maintain mobility. Guys won't be as tight throughout the season. Again, reduce risk of injury. And we want to touch a little bit on everything in season workouts. We want to focus on mobility. We want to focus on strength and power and a little bit of hypertrophy, right? We want to keep these sessions short and sweet, 45 minutes, half hour, maybe up to an hour, right? And a big thing with this, which a lot of coaches miss out on, is it does increase the rate of recovery, right? As we all know, getting blood flow to the muscle will help increase recovery. That's why we do hot baths. That's why we do ice baths. That's why we stretch post-workout. Working out does the exact same thing, right? Especially if we know how to limit it, we know how to control that. My personal example is when I was playing out at the University of Guelph, my first 2 seasons out there, our strength coach was a guy who worked the CFL for a number of years. He came down to Guelph, but he had a very powerlifting background. He personally trained in powerlifting. So throughout the entire offseason, we benched and we squatted 2 to 3 times a week. When we got in season, our workouts were almost the exact same as off season. He just kind of scaled them back. We benched twice a week. We squatted twice a week. Wasn't a high emphasis on mobility. His sole focus was strength and conditioning, almost exactly as it's defined. My last year of playing at Guelph, had the opportunity to work with a world-class trainer by the name of Shea Pierre. You can find him on social media. He's known as Pierre Elite Performance. Our workouts were 45 minutes at the most. That was probably the longest we did. He focused on mobility. 30 minutes of that workout was mobility and muscle activation. So things such as quick squat jumps, focusing on ankle mobility, being able to move in a very efficient manner and feeling as good as we possibly can. And then a very short and sweet workout, which consisted of a little bit of everything. We would do 3 reps of a bench press and then 3 box jumps. It doesn't seem like much, but it's enough to carry over our off-season work to maintain our strength and our power throughout the entire season, so that day 1 of training camp, we were just as efficient, just as strong, just as fast as our week leading up to the Yates Cup that season, our league final, right? That's our goal of our in-season training. So on the right side, I have a sample workout, 45 minutes, 20 minutes mobility work. We want to focus on ankles, hamstrings, hips, and shoulders, all those areas where we see a lot of injuries within our athletes. 10 minutes of activation work, pogo hops, increasing durability of the ankles. Medicine ball chest toss, again, increasing the amount of muscle fibers recruited in the chest. High knee, something very quick, short, sweet to get the body moving. Bench press, medicine ball chest toss, right? There's our workout. Now, 3 exercises, that's all we need. 2 to 3 sets, 3 to 4 reps. Our PE is at 6 or 70 to 80% of 1 RM. And then our chest toss is fast, right? Our box jump is just reducing the amount of compression on the joints. So we're just moving the ground up. We're not trying to jump as high as we can. We're just trying to explode up and then land softly. And then same thing, kettlebell swing, very light, working through that movement. And then again, if we program into our actual week, right? Program volume intensity based on your game schedule and practice plans. You don't want a very heavy, high volume, intense workout the day before a game. That's not beneficial, right? We want to peak our athletes' abilities for game day, not in the same sense of off-season training. We are working week to week. So we want them to have, we want them to feel as best as they can going into game day, right? 2 to 3 workouts per week, schedule dependent. So what I have on the right side, day after a game, no practice or film, no workout, right? They're taxed. They've been crushed. Let them go recover. They probably won't leave the couch. You might have game film depending on your level of athletes, what team you play for, et cetera, et cetera. Day 1, you might not have practice at all. You might have an off day, right? This is where we get a higher intensity, a power-based workout, something a little bit more dynamic, movement-based, a little bit higher intensity. Get them moving, get blood flowing, everything of that nature, right? Day 2, install practice, generally install our competition practice. We don't want to work out. Day 3, if we bring the intensity and the volume in practice, we want to bring the intensity down in the weight room. Day 4, situation practice. Day 5, walkthrough, might have mobility based. biggest thing I want to point out for this is you got to remember that practice is also a workout, right? A 2-hour on-field practice is still working out. The guys are still running, they're still sprinting, they're still hitting each other, even if it's blocking, right? That is still very taxing on the body mentally and physically. So let's not overly tax them in the weight room. Let's take care of them in the weight room. Let's use that again to reduce the amount of injury. Again, review as we look through this year-long training cycle phases, right? We want to plan and prepare now to make the offseason easier. We want to plan and prepare now. So if we do have things like COVID pop in to our lives and throw a huge wrench in our plans, we're easily adaptable to that program, right? Year-long training cycle on field. We want to progress when athletes are ready, not time-based. And we want to coach like crazy for this. We want to be the best coaches as possible for this so that we can progress into those sport-specific, position-specific movements, right? Benefits of training besides performance enhancement. It's a great time to build team culture, gym culture. We get to find out who the leader is, right? If you want to be the coach that's the leader of the team, this is a great time to show them that you're leading this team. You might want a more player-led team. So this is a great time to allow those players to step up and lead the team, right? And then direction. What kind of team do you want? Do you want the hardest working team? Do you want the most efficient team? Do you want the toughest team? This is a great time to create that direction so that you're not wasting 2 to 3 weeks in season to get your point across. You can do that in the off season, so it's seamless into in season. Then again, how COVID affected training, different ways to project training, right? How to stay on track. We know how to stay on track now. Nothing really changes. We just change how we load our athletes, things of that nature. And then culture control, right? Are we bringing our athletes together? Are they all sitting on their own right now doing nothing? Things of that nature. And then in-season training, very simple: recovery, no lost performance in season, and injury prevention. All right. Any questions, DJ, as we finish up there?
Yeah, coaches, if you have questions, you can go ahead and unmute yourself or put them in the chat and we'll get them to Coach Bresch here. I know I've got one to kick it off, Coach, is when you're talking about getting back to on-field stuff as opposed to back into the weight room, how many times a week do you think, you know, you mentioned the Thursday throwings and stuff like that when you're with the Thunder, how many times a week do you think you do that to start with? Is that a once a week thing or a 2 to 3, or what are your thoughts on that?
So I'll answer that kind of both sides of things. So regular off season, if you want to look into the future, you want to start very slow, once to twice per week, right? You want to slowly progress that. It might be something as simple as just adding distance to your sprint, or a little bit more distance to your endurance training, actually doing running specific. In terms of COVID, right, it is a little bit accelerated. Even 3 times a week might be a little much. But again, we want to allow those rest periods in between everything, right? So if you have your athlete coming, or if you have your team coming in 6 days a week, right, we want those workouts to be short and sweet. And maybe we want 3 of those 6 to be on field training or some form of that. If you only can meet your athletes 3 times a week, maybe only 2 of those have that on-field component attached to it, because we want to allow them to have those rest periods. We want them to allow to adapt back to, you know, longer sprints, longer running periods, running on turf or grass, being around our teammates. Again, added intensity. You have that more motivation. You have players around you, you know, hyping you up. So we want to really limit those situations, limit those all those kind of taxing efforts and movements, so that when we get into season, we start seeing each other, you know, 4, 5, 6, 7 times a week. Our body's prepared for it, instead of just jumping in, you know, 4 times a week. So I would say 2 to 3 to answer your question, kind of on both ends. Again, limited to, again, how much you have your athletes training in the weight room as well, or how much they've done during this pandemic leading up to that point in time.
Perfect. And then another one for me is, I kind of made a couple notes here on some of those charts. It said, ideally you got about a 5 to 6 week progression till you get up to 100% there. And then at another time you said you need at least 3 weeks to prep the athletes, to lessen injury before you get going in training camp or the regular season. So is that kind of the benchmark of time, somewhere between 3 and 6 weeks? Because coaches at any level, we don't know when we're going to get the green light, but I imagine we'll kind of find out a few weeks ahead, right? It might be 6 weeks. That would be great. It could be 3 weeks. We don't know. So is that kind of your time frame, 3 to 6?
Yeah, 3 to 6. Based off of everything I've read through the NSCA, they've kind of given that 5 to 6 week time frame. I think they're being very generous with that time frame. In the terms of football, we might get a little bit of a longer kind of leeway period, just because our season is still 3 to 4 months away. So we still have a lot of time to prepare. But it might come to the point where we find out in 3 weeks, we're good to practice, we're good to meet as a team, but in 3 weeks is game one. You won't get a preseason game. You won't get anything like that. So we still want to use that 3 week period to kind of slowly build up to that. Just because it says, hey, we have a game in 3 weeks, it doesn't mean we start practice 5 days a week in that 3 week period. So we got to be able to plan kind of for the best of the best scenario where we do get 6+ weeks to build up to that. We also got to be ready for worst case scenario outside of not having a season of, hey, you might only get 3 weeks to prepare yourself for a game. So again, that might be more film time, more classroom time, less on-field time, so that the athlete can prepare his body for that. So having kind of both progressions, and like I said, everything I've gotten from the NSCA has been 5 to 6 weeks. Everything I've gotten more from presentations, things of that nature from coaches throughout this pandemic is they're ideally prepping for 3 weeks. But again, context of that is they are strength coaches within, Div 1 schools or high schools in the States where their sole job is strength and conditioning. They're not also dealing with practice plans and, game planning and things of that nature. So take that into consideration as well.
And I just want to make sure I heard you correctly. Did you suggest that something to consider would be, if we do get a short time frame, to maybe not go a full, say, 5 practices per week, scale it back a little bit? Is that what you said?
Yes, that exactly what I said. Yeah, because again, we want to reduce the risk of injury. So we want to give our athletes enough time to recover so that they can go into the next session or the next practice healthy. So again, and that might be more classroom sessions. That might be more walk and talk, less live actual scenarios. You might have to run more, skelly against air compared to traditional, one-on-ones or things of that nature. Again, competition is important because that does prep your athlete for the season, but we really have to scale that back if we only get a 3 week time period.
All right, Brush, it looks like that's it. Appreciate your time tonight. Thanks for the insight. I got some good ideas, planning on especially the return to play and that sort of stuff. So I appreciate that info, and it's good to connect to you again. So thanks again. And coaches, we'll be back here tomorrow night for Coach Reinbold. So we'll see you guys then. Coach Russ, thank you.
Hey, thanks again, DJ. I appreciate it.